Hello, Museum Next. We are so excited after 3 wonderful days to bring it home for you guys and talk with 3 of my absolute favorite game designers in the world about the thing that you probably want to hear about, which is what didn't work. So, here for the next 20 minutes, we are just going to chat about things that we ran that failed and what we learned from them. So, why don't I pass it off to our wonderful speakers and you can talk a little bit about yourselves and then we'll get to it. Sound good?
Thanks, Kellian. I'll jump in. My name is Erica Gangsey. I'm Director of Interpretive Media at SF MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and we do audio, video, interpretive galleries, and games to help our visitors better connect with the artwork on view. And I'll pass it to Lawrence.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Lawrence Moore. I'm the founder and CEO of LARPing in Color. We are an initiative to bring resources for diversity and inclusion to all kinds of interactive mediums, such as playable theater and live action role play, things like that. Yeah, that's me. Who's next?
I'm Barry Joseph, founder of Barry Joseph Consulting, co-founder of Games for Change. I've been involved in games-based learning for over 2 decades, 15 of those working with museums on games and other forms of digital engagement. And I spent 6 years at the American Museum of Natural History as Associate Director of Digital Learning. Kelly, thanks so much for inviting me to be with this amazing group today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to hang out with you guys. And I have to say, I have so enjoyed just the lead up to this talk, like being able to hang out with you guys and talk shop. I did introduce myself. My name is Kellian Adams Pletcher, and I'm the director of GLAM, Galleries, Libraries, Archives, and Museums for Fablevision Studios. I'm a game designer and producer with a specialty in location-based games. I've been building games, gosh, for the last 12 years or so, starting with my very first game out of the gate, which was Murder at the Met. So talk about, I know, right? Talk about a game to cut your teeth on, but 12 years later, I've learned a thing or two. So speaking of learning a thing or two, let's get started. Lawrence, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Let's go for it. In the years that I've been building immersive storytelling experiences, I've had the honor and the pleasure of meeting a wide variety of audiences, all with different needs and expectations. Many of those expectations change vastly based on precedents that are set by storytellers or gaming instructors. It's important that we communicate our intent about the play experience while also establishing a basis of trust to build a reputable name for your community. Establishing a primary play experience. This can be done early in your advertising where possible. Set expectations for engagement by using clear, intentional language, visually descriptive media and images, and avoid using elaborate, flowery words that don't precisely describe what participants will engage with. Will they be solving a puzzle that requires quick thinking and lots of communication? Have pictures of someone in the experience discussing and possibly gesturing at something to indicate deep thought or consideration of something in the room. Will they be expected to move quickly? Be specific. Use words like move quickly, run, or fast. This might be evident or self-explanatory, but it is important to emphasize the mechanics of the experience rather than leave your participants left to assume anything. This is especially important when it comes to physical accessibility. Make inclusive practices a standard. I had an experience recently where my monthly campaign LARP had a new participant join who uses they, them pronouns. We offer free pronoun patches for everyone when they check in, but since we have a small devoted community, pronoun patches have not been used regularly. Our new player took and wore their pronoun patch, but I quickly realized that they were the only one doing so, which certainly could make someone feel ostracized. By the end of the weekend, they were no longer wearing their pronoun patch, which I completely understood. By not normalizing pronoun patches, despite having them available, we could have alienated them and degraded their experience. Not every experience may use pronoun patches, but there are dozens of other practices that could be in place that you may encourage. But encouraging something and making it a normal, expected part of your experience for returning participants is important. New participants have enough to juggle when they arrive. Communicate your inclusivity practices non-verbally by having the community, staff, volunteers, and other participants engage with these practices even when they don't feel it's necessary. Focus on transparency and trust. No one is perfect. We're all here doing our best, and we frequently stumble, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in big ways. When running an event of any kind, instead of trying to pull the veil in front of your participants with illusions of perfection, focus your experience on being the best at what you have to offer. If you don't have enough volunteers and it causes a disruption in the flow of your check in, your logistics, or the gaming experience itself, be upfront about it. Identify it, own it, and make a plan to do better. Tell your team and participants how you'll be addressing the problem and be sure to follow up afterwards. Being consistent with your transparency establishes trust that will quickly become a bigger asset than perfection will ever be. If your experience is based on a community, they will appreciate and support you when mistakes are made, assuming those mistakes are not repeated. People respect leaders who can take criticism and recover gracefully much more than a Mr. Perfect who they can never identify with.
Lawrence, I loved hearing about how much what you were talking about was really focused on how to care for the community of players, thinking about the player experience from the perspective of the person who's facilitating and supporting them to have the best experience that they can have. Often when we're talking about games and museums, we're thinking about the mechanics and logistics of distribution. You're reminding us that what's really important is the experience of the player and making sure that the largest numbers of people feel comfortable participating in that community. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important because what are we as a gaming community in whatever venue if we don't have people who want to attend regularly and tell other people about it? So the community is so absolutely important.
My Erica, let's hear what you were having to say about Country Dog Gentleman.
Sure, I would be delighted. So I'm going to talk about the SF MoMA family's Country Dog Gentleman Gallery game, which was one of the first museum games I ever worked on back in 2010. So it was an app which included a series of open-ended prompts which could be used in any gallery to facilitate close looking and conversation among family members. And I'll give 3 examples of failures from that game's development process and the ways that those lessons have become foundational to the Play SF MoMA program. The first is that platform and form factor must match the experience goals. Simply put, in our case, the game's content facilitated close looking and conversation. However, that content was delivered via text instructions and animation, a form factor that encouraged looking down instead of looking around. So we've solved for that with our new family game Art Goggles, which launched earlier this year. And it's an audio only game experience, which means that it's an eyes up experience. So the second point I'll make is around scope expectations. Museum apps aren't AAA games. And that isn't to say that museums can't make great digital games, but it's important to note that the marketing budget alone for a major app game is more than most institutions' annual budget entirely. In the case of the Country Dog Gentleman game, it was built as a bespoke app, which was separate from our own institutional audio guide app, which meant that families had to either download it or they had to check out a device from the desk. And I'll say that museum tech projects in general aren't well served by the if you build it, they will come mentality. And in the case of our game, take up rates really suffered as a result of our preciousness around the platform. I mean, our game was awesome, but it wasn't Candy Crush. So we've solved for this by baking games content into offerings and platforms that people are already using. For example, in 2014, we launched a series of tiny games on SF MoMA's social channels through a campaign called #PlayArtfully. And the new Art Goggles family game I mentioned earlier is available on the same platforms and streams as all other museum content, namely the SF MoMA app and SoundCloud. The third point I'll make is around generally redefining our notion about deliverables when it comes to games programming. So prototyping and playtesting can actually be integral parts of a public-facing museum games program. That is to say, your finished product doesn't need to be an app when perhaps, as in the case of Country Dog Gentleman, a set of cards would do just as well. So right on the heels of Country Dog Gentleman, we did an exhibition called Art Game Lab, where we crowdsourced paper-based games from the local creative community. And in our Play SF MoMA Games initiative, we include game jams and live play tests as part of an overall suite of offerings. And we've found museum visitors to be really eager participants in our playtesting and game development processes. But I would actually say the most important thing I learned from Country Dog Gentlemen is to engage game designers early and often in your processes. So games are a medium in their own right. And if you want to build a really good game, you should work with creatives who excel in their medium the same way you would if you were working in video or audio. And we've been doing so with every project since, and I believe our games are better for it. Thank you.
Say, you said the thing. I love that you said the thing, that these are not AAA games and that we need to do what we can with what we have and not pretend that we have $5 billion budgets. I think that's so important.
Erica, can you say more about what it takes to create a culture that allows you to be able to think about lessons learned from mistakes? Now, in a design context, it's not exactly mistakes. It's always an iterative process. We're always trying to learn. But often in museums, things are only seen as perfect when they're complete and done, and that's the goal. Things aren't seen to be evolving and changing over time. So how have you been able to make a space for you and your colleagues to be able to recognize things that can be learned from to improve moving forward without having to hide them?
Well, I'd say that I've benefited from a sort of holistic division-wide culture that incorporates design thinking principles and practices into our work. And I loved what Lawrence said earlier about transparency and trust and not sort of hiding behind a veil of perfection, because I think that's so much of what museums suffer from. And I've actually found that visitor reaction to our live prototyping and playtesting sessions has been the best advocate for continuing to allow visitors behind that veil.
I really resonated with what you mentioned about like meeting people where they are with the medium that they're comfortable with. That's a lot that we have to deal with, especially when it comes to like our logistics system and just getting people access to the events.
Barry, you promised you were going to talk about buffalo farts, and I'm hoping you're going to deliver.
Let's
Shall
see.
we?
All right, I'm ready. Let's do it. I'm going to talk about two fails, and I feel comfortable talking about them because I was the lead on both of them. It was from the time that I worked at the American Museum of Natural History. The first project was on our game Micro Rangers, and it had to do with the beginning phase of the project. Micro Rangers was an augmented reality game that let the museum visitors shrink down to the microscopic scale to be able to go into the permanent exhibits and work with scientists at the macro level and concerned citizens to solve problems. So to get this off the ground, we created a prototype with two different locations, working with high school students to make their narrative. The first one had a narrative about a flatulent buffalo. So my lesson from here is don't lead with a flatulent buffalo, because we use that as the first of two steps when we were introducing it to the key stakeholder in the museum, the head of education. The second step was going to be amazing. It was a coral reef that had been bleached, and there was a boat captain who needed help figuring out what was happening. But we started with this experience that was all about this buffalo farmer who was having a problem. His buffalo was too flatulent, creating a lot of methanogen, bad for both the buffalo and the environment. The moment that the key stakeholder experienced that, and I saw her face thinking, what is this? I realized that we had designed it for the potential youth visitor, not for our key stakeholder in the museum. And as a result, we thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible. She's going to hate this now, but we'll be okay when we get to the coral reef. Well, as soon as we finished the flatulent buffalo, she said, thank you, I've seen enough. And we thought, oh my gosh, not only did we show her something that really didn't sell to her what the project was about, she didn't get to see the best. So I learned, think about your stakeholders and their needs before you show them something, and don't necessarily lead with the best, rather don't end with the best. You want to lead with the best. The second project was an escape room that we did that was astrophysics themed, where in our planetarium, you were in a room that was supposedly a spaceship that had crashed on Mars and you needed to get off. And the lesson from here was don't introduce stakeholders through playtesting. Introducing stakeholders is when you show the people who have to make key decisions your project and get their buy-in. You want them to see the best of what you have. Playtesting is the opposite. Playtesting is showing something that's broken so you can learn how to fix it. And it's fine if it's broken, it's part of the experience. But if you're trying to convince stakeholders about how great your project is, showing them something that's broken might not make sense. And not only was it broken, we were deciding to not really give a lot of advice during this escape room, which if you've ever been in an escape room is not what you usually do, because we wanted to see what wasn't working. But as a result, we just watched our stakeholders for an hour struggle and have a hard time, feel stupid, and really just hate the experience. By the time it was done, it did not move forward. They were done. There was no way to get them back on board. Even though the next day we brought in elementary school students and their parents and their teachers, and they absolutely loved it. But by then it was way too late. So we introduced the stakeholders through playtesting. Big mistake, killed the project. Don't do it.
We can all relate.
Don't do it.
And we've all done that too, right? I mean, like, who hasn't shown some prototype version to stakeholders and they're like, this will never work. And you're like, no, wait, it's gonna work, I promise.
Barry, it seems like you have so many gems specifically about sort of stakeholder inclusion and stakeholder buy-in. I was wondering if there was any other wisdom you could share for folks who maybe don't have established games programs in their institutions yet about how to have those initial conversations.
Sure, well, of course, those are my two examples of things not to do. I could have a longer talk about things I recommend you do to avoid things like that. And that means in part really noticing really early on in the process, what are the key areas that you need buy-in from at any stage along the process of development, production, and release, and who are the key individuals in those areas to start working with early. So for something like Micro Rangers, we had a group of advisors, internal advisors, where we had someone from each of the key areas of the museum, the communications, IT, exhibitions, who can let us know potential red flags to not trip them as we moved along the process. And as we got ready for launch, they already were informed, they were engaged, they were excited about the project, and they knew who to connect us with to make sure that whatever needed to be in place was going to be in place. So whatever the project is, figuring out who not just the stakeholders are who make decisions, but the people you need to be allied with to make it be successful, and to start building those relationships as early as possible. All right, last but not least, Kellian, let's hear from you.
I mean, if you insist.
16 seconds is a really long time not to know what you're doing. You get about 16 seconds to get people into the game. Go to this place on your phone that says app download. Do you know what the Wi-Fi password is? You can reset your password and then send it to your email. Your password? Oh, you forgot your password. You've got to sign in. Oh, it's not there. Why isn't it? No, maybe it's under a different name. So museum lobby is a very high stress social situation for people. They like to feel like an expert. They like to feel like they know what they're doing. Which brings me to my second museum fail learning. It's not that people don't want to play your game. It's just that you can't surprise them when they walk through the door. Yes, I would love to play it. How do you do it on your phone? Put that down. Yeah, we'll be there in just a second. Yeah, how do I play that again? If you give them the opportunity to download the game ahead of time and be prepared when they walk through the door, then the experience is one where they are the expert for their family and they are able to share this thing that they understand. It's a museum. Everybody wants to look smart. Games are all about failing, so you've got to find a way to mitigate that for them. It's a very different environment than if people are playing a game at home by themselves in private space with their headphones on. You can fail a lot of times alone, but you don't want to do that in front of other people. The third thing is the search to activity ratio. Decided that we were going to play this game. We ran to the first stop. We were so excited, split into groups, and then we ran to the second stop, which was a mile away. And by the time we got to the second stop, we were done. We were absolutely done because the activity to search ratio was just way too high. People will look for maybe, I don't know, about twice as long as they'll actually do something. But you have to make sure when you're creating a location-based game that most of the activity that people are doing is not trying to follow a map, find directions, walk from one end all the way to the other end of a museum. People don't like to double back. So those are my three things about audience engagement, my three favorite museum fails.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for all of our favorite fails. We hope that you guys also make wonderful, successful fails and that you fail forward and that you screw up all sorts of fantastic things, because if you're screwing it up, then that means that you're doing something, you're trying hard. So please reach out to all of us. Tell us about the things that are working and are not working, because if we know anything about game design in the museum scene is that it's a community, and we would love to hear what you guys are building. So fail lots, build lots of stuff, and we will see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye. Wait, where'd Barry go?
I failed off my chair.